Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to YPOers and friends around the world. I'm Julie Simon, co-chair of the YPO Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health Group. And for the past 2 years, I have been providing psychedelic integration groups weekly for YPO members. I've dedicated my life to advancing psychedelic-assisted care, not only because of the overwhelming evidence supporting its effectiveness, but also because of my own personal experience. Currently, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Integro, a pre-launch digital integration platform combining community, live groups, and daily content, leveraging AI to transform integration and to build the first large-scale validated data model on best practices. I also host Back to the Default, a new podcast for YPO and beyond, where I explore the vulnerability of integration with leaders who don't just talk about transformation, they live it. I want to express my deepest gratitude to the many YPO members dedicating their time and expertise to the psychedelic-assisted care ecosystem and doing the inner work yourselves. And lastly, I want to thank our producers, Ash Jones and Rebecca Reagan. Today's session will run for 60 minutes with a Q&A session following my conversation with PSFC. If you have questions, please submit them via the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion at 40 minutes after the hour. Please note that this session is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to the recording. This is a great reason to sign up for future programs, even if you can't attend live. Today's guests are the Psychedelic Science Funder Collaborative, also known as PSFC. PSFC is a community of philanthropists dedicated to supporting psychedelic medicine and science. We're incredibly grateful and privileged to be joined today by Genevieve Jurvetson, Dan Grossman, and Graham Boyd. First up is Graham Boyd, the Executive Director of PSFC. Welcome, Graham.
Hi, Julie. So happy to be here.
So tell me, what led you to co-found PSFC?
Well, that was about 8 years ago, which is just a blink of an eye, it feels right now. And I would say at the time, psychedelics seemed to be such a marginal issue. There were maybe 10 or 15 philanthropists supporting the field. It was just starting to peek its head above being underground, and yet had such potential, so much potential to help people. And I think we're seeing that now. It now is sort of hard to imagine that it was so marginal. But we started PSFC with the idea, Joe Green and I did 8 years ago, with the idea that by marshaling the resources of philanthropists who really have benefited and who believe in the healing powers of psychedelics, that we could change the world. I mean, that sounds a bit grandiose, but we could change the world. We want to live in a world where real healing is available to all. And so the mission for PSFC is to make psychedelic healing available to all who can benefit.
So how has the organization evolved since its inception? So 8 years ago versus what it is today, how has things changed?
Sure. Well, 8 years ago, there were about 8 or 9 of us who gathered around a dining room table in San Francisco, and we're just noodling over the idea of, would this be attractive? Would this be attractive to philanthropists? And what needed funding? And we really came up with the idea that if we could get the research done so that one medicine could get FDA approval, that in and of itself would be a huge achievement. And at the time, we thought it maybe would require raising something like $10 million, which turned out to be a hilariously small number compared to what was needed. But as we started going around and talking to people who had benefited from psychedelics themselves, the thing that kept happening again and again was there's this insight of, well, if it's helped me, or if it's helped a member of my family, why shouldn't it be available more broadly? Why should it be this secret, illegal, underground thing? Why shouldn't it be part of our mainstream mental health care system? And people wanted to participate in that. And so that really has caused PSFC to grow. We can talk about what all we're involved in doing, but I think it's that fundamental insight of what has helped me or my family should be available to others.
Now, I know that you have a drug policy background.
Mhm.
How has that shaped your approach to PSFC and the challenges it addresses?
Well, that's why Joe Green and I are really such good kind of yin and yang partners for this thing. So my background is I'm an attorney and I ran the ACLU's national criminal justice work for a number of years. I've run ballot initiatives around the country to change public policy. So I feel like I've got the toolbox for trying to help move us from a world in which psychedelics are literally a crime to one in which it is a legal tool for healing for all who can benefit, right? Like that's some of the toolbox I have. And Joe has been involved in public policy and also really in sort of the world of philanthropy and the tech world in particular. And so the two of us together really, I think, started off with the right set of, I don't know, perspectives and connections, if you will. But it's really become so much bigger than the two of us. And you're going to be hearing from Genevieve and Dan shortly. But we've got an incredible board, we've got an incredible staff, and now we've got a group of 200 philanthropists who are part of PSFC. And the sum of all those parts is powerful indeed. And Julie, as you know, you're one of our members and participate in many of the things we do.
Um, well, 200 members, it's quite impressive from 8 sitting around the table.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So, what gaps or barriers in the field made it clear that a strategic roadmap was an essential and important thing to develop? I know today on this call, we're going to hear from Dan talking about the strategic roadmap, but what happened and what was the impetus within PSFC that this is something that was needed?
Well, sure. Well, I'll answer that by going back a little bit. So we started, as I mentioned a moment ago, we started with the idea of getting FDA approval for one substance. And the one that was farthest along at the time was MDMA. And MAPS was the organization that was moving it along. So our initial thought was get FDA approval for one substance, and that just sort of opens a doorway and everything else will follow. And in some ways, like, we're not going to worry about that right now. What we found was that, first of all, it was harder to get FDA approval than we initially anticipated. And even after getting FDA approval, you've still got to build a whole system of delivering care. And that's kind of a wordy way of saying it. But if you think about it, there's not a system of care right now for psychedelic medicine because it's not a pharmaceutical in the sense of it's a pill you can take and then that's all you need. And neither is it just talk therapy that you talk to a therapist and that's all you need. It's kind of the intersection of those two things, and it's specialized. So there's a whole workforce that needs to be created to make this work. There's a whole network of clinics that need to happen. And in the meantime, it's emerged that some states are interested in creating access. Colorado and Oregon are the first two states, but creating access outside of the kind of pharma FDA model. And so you put all that together, and it's complicated. It's way more complicated than we thought at the beginning. And now the philanthropists come onto the scene, 200 different people, each with their own interest and their own sort of ideas about, well, there's that research or there's this thing. And it ends up being an almost overwhelming number of things that both are needed and that donors are interested in. And we came to believe in the last couple of years that rather than having 1,000 flowers blooming and just hope for the best, we wanted to also have some analysis of what is going to be most high impact, high leverage, and the sequencing. Sometimes one thing needs to happen before the other thing happens. And I want to be clear, it's not our view that everyone should follow a particular plan. It's our view that a plan helps guide people's decision making. And for all of our members, the things that they're interested in, we support them in all of those things.
Um, and in terms of PSFC's role, you have the roadmap, which we're going to talk about, but it's
Mhm.
also a community
Yeah.
of philanthropists. Can you explain a little bit about the community component as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and honestly, I would start with community because that's really what it's about. This is a group of people who, I mean, I've got a couple of people in mind right now, but I think probably some in your audience can relate to this. If you're someone who's running a company, who's, out there in the world being successful in a probably relatively conventional way, and you happen to have come across psychedelic healing as being beneficial for you, you might find yourself in a context where the other hedge fund managers or the other CEOs are kind of like, that's weird. I don't know about that. Like it might not be a space in which you can really talk about those things. PSFC is exactly that space. You're among peers who are philanthropists at a significant level, who are leaders in society, and who really understand how psychedelic healing works and how beneficial it is. So being in that community is really it's really powerful. And then in addition to that sense of connection with peers and like-minded people, it's also a place where learning happens. People are not just writing checks. People are involved in really knowing the organizations they're funding, sometimes serving on their boards, becoming experts in their own right, and sharing that information with each other. So they're connecting, they're learning. And then finally, in this community, they're magnifying their impact. The kind of change we want to do is beyond any one philanthropist to do. And I think every one of our members knows that. And so by joining together and collaborating in their philanthropy, their impact can actually be quite substantial.
Yeah, I think the education component to the philanthropist, so they're knowing what they're contributing to, and you're helping getting them to understand everything that's going on in the field, which I think is also part of this roadmap as well. Is that not the case where everybody who's in the audience today is going to receive this roadmap, which is in itself a form of an education too? Is that true?
Yeah, no, you're pointing to how I think the learning is sort of cross learning among our members. Each is developing expertise and talking to each other, and also we have a small but mighty staff who do research, who do vetting of organizations, who produce reports like the one that you're distributing, and those are a tremendous. I guess the way I think of it is that's a foundation for learning.
Hmm.
It's a foundation for learning, and then as the community starts engaging in the work and with each other, the members of PSFC are also learning from each other.
All right, great. Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear from one of your funders and philanthropists within PSFC, Genevieve Jurvetson.
Thank you.
Hello, Genevieve.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us, Julie. What an honor. And I see so many people participating today who could be up here talking about their work in psychedelics. So it's truly an honor.
So I know something that you've shared before is a lot of people, a lot of philanthropists come into the space from personal experiences. What was your personal experience that got you into wanting to be a philanthropist in the space?
Yeah. So sadly, I had a family member addicted to heroin, and I'm sure there are other people listening who can relate to this story. But like many Americans, he broke his neck, got addicted to prescription opiates. That addiction escalated into a daily heroin habit, and I found myself listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast with an ibogaine practitioner named Dr. Martine Polanco. And I thought, oh my God, maybe this can help because if you know opiate addiction, there aren't any great cures. So I had the good fortune of bumping into Martine at a conference a couple of weeks after I listened to the podcast. And I said, can you help my family member? And he said, of course, can you help me with this group of Navy SEALs that we want to send down to Mexico to get treatment? So I offered to host a dinner for this group, which ended up becoming Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions. And I heard these stories from these primarily Navy SEALs who were really struggling to exist in life. And then they'd go down to Mexico, get one treatment of ibogaine and come back effectively cured. So at that time, I was like, how can we not help these guys? They're like our bravest and most incredible human beings who were willing to sacrifice their lives to support us, like no brainer. So that was the first check we wrote into the space. And indeed, it was, I think, the first check vets received as well. And Graham and Joe helped us structure this grant in a way that it was legally clean. Thank you, Graham. Fast forward a couple of years, the family member was never able to get access to Ibogaine and died of an overdose in 2020. And when he passed, and it was such a tragic experience that if anyone's lost someone to addiction, it just feels like someone slips through your fingers. We decided to set up a family foundation focused on moonshots in mental health. And at the time I was co-founder of a startup, and I left that to really focus my time and energy on all things related to PSFC, and have been doing that ever since.
It's interesting. You mentioned the foundation to focus on mental health. A lot of YPO members may be looking at psychedelics, not just from a mental health lens, but also from a performance lens. Can you speak to that a little bit and how you view the different uses of psychedelics?
Yeah, and I think these tools are so powerful for anyone. And there's a term, I forget what it is, but it's something like the vast majority of folks who are just generally anxious and have issues, that we could, get some benefit from these medicines as well. I think that's wonderful. One of the things I'm most excited about is the state regulated access programs, because that's for folks who don't necessarily have a mental health diagnosis, but want to seek out this healing. I think these medicines are so profoundly useful for family therapy, for couples therapy. So this is why we need safe and legal access. There's also an incredible initiative underway in Texas called Minds, that's looking at how these compounds can be used to enhance creativity and problem solving. And indeed, there was a lot of research done in the 50s and 60s along these lines too. So I'd encourage people to research it, but I'm loving the resurgence of research into areas beyond just mental health conditions.
Now, philanthropy versus for-profit or the market versus nonprofit. How does a funder look at thinking in which areas to fund, and why are some things philanthropy and some things are business? And how do you look at that from your foundation and from your investment portfolio?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm someone who loves capitalism for all of its flaws, and if there is a for-profit solution, that's usually the best one. So it's a great question. I think as philanthropists, we need to be really thoughtful. If there is a way for a company instead of a nonprofit to solve the problem, they frankly should. But we're dealing with a set of compounds that now we have some patent protection, and it seems like that's an option for folks. But a few years back, it seemed like there wasn't any patent protection. So there was a real market failure here. So if it wasn't, who would put tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into these clinical trials if there was no upside on the other end? And when you're talking about bringing drugs through FDA and the scale of the funding required, it really ends up being beyond where we are with philanthropy today. So that's one reason, just a pure market failure. I think, I'd say, I'd leave it at that. Like if there's not a market solution, then that's the place where philanthropists have to step in. Oh, sorry. The other thing is, in this country, we have the NIH and National Institute of Mental Health, the National Institute of Health that sits above it. And they weren't funding these trials. So if it weren't for philanthropists kind of carrying this work forward over the past few decades, this research wouldn't get funded at all. And hopefully that's about to change.
And when you say it's about to change, tell us what do you see happening?
Well, I'm fairly bullish on the new administration and their passion for addressing root causes as it relates to mental health or health in general. And I think these tools are some of the only tools we have that actually address the root causes of mental health conditions.
Now, you do the Founders Circle. I see that on your label here. Tell us, what is that, and how, if people are YPO members today are interested in getting involved, what kind of opportunities are there? I know MAPS has an event coming up, and maybe PSFC has something going on there, but how do you see people getting involved with PSFC, and what is the Founders Circle?
Yeah, so maybe I'll describe the two different ways to become a PSFC member. So we have about 200 members of PSFC, and we invite people who have given $100,000 or more to nonprofits in the space of psychedelics to become members. And then we have a subset of those members who have given $1 million or more to nonprofits in the field. And these are also our most active philanthropists in the space. And I think we have about 30 or 40 families who are part of the Founders Circle. And we have separate events and some separate offerings for those folks. But we invite folks who are interested in becoming philanthropists in the field. MAPS is hosting their, I think they do every 2 years, their big conference in Denver. And we'll have a specific donor day on, I think it's June 17th. Correct me if I'm wrong, Graham. But welcome anyone who's interested to come join us for that. That was 2 years ago, that was one of the best conferences I've ever been to. So highly recommend folks attend if you're interested in this content. And then we do regional dinners, conferences. Our Founders Circle has a summit every year that's incredible. Our head of community is on the line, Rose Uzanova, who I'm sure several folks on the line also know, but I encourage you guys to reach out if this speaks to your heart.
Is there anything else that you think our listeners today should know about from you?
Yeah, let me share a little bit more about the why and why I think this area of philanthropy is so compelling. Just in the last 24 hours, I've gotten texts from people saying like, whether I set them up with a therapist or somehow they had access to psychedelic healing, and they said, XYZ feels like this saved their life. To get those kind of messages like, wow, you're really changing families, you're changing someone's life so fundamentally. I can't think of any philanthropy that's more rewarding. And we've certainly gotten involved in all kinds of philanthropic efforts. And there's topics that are near and dear to my heart, like climate. But my family's probably not going to make a huge dent in climate because the scale of the capital needed to change some of the biggest problems facing the world today is just enormous. But yet this field has been carried by like 20 families. And the leverage that they've had with, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions at this point, is really quite extraordinary. So I look at this audience and think, what an extraordinary group of business leaders who could really make a dent, who could really see incredible impact with both the resources and their connections and their leadership. It's hard to imagine a more important thing that we could all be engaged in than kind of helping other humans bring their best self to life.
And
so it's fun. This is
fun.
Group of people. Yeah. These are the events I most look forward to. And like, I've met a lot of my dearest friends through PSFC and imported a lot of my dearest friends to PSFC. So it's an amazing community. And I think we have a lot of fun while doing good.
Now, before we bring Dan out to talk about the roadmap, what's your personal feeling on this roadmap and the need for a roadmap for funders?
For me personally, I get bombarded with inbound requests for grants. And even though I've only been doing this for like 5 or 6 years, I'm like an old timer in the field, and I feel deeply overwhelmed and trying to like navigate, like, where is the best use of our capital? And it got really intense at the end of, or maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago. So when Dan came to the table, was a senior partner at BCG, bringing that lens of strategy to this world where outside of the scientific research that's done by top tier universities, and I think you can feel as a philanthropist, like, oh, I kind of get how that's done. Everything else is a startup. So it's incredibly difficult to navigate that space. So having someone spend a year kind of deep diving with all of these nascent organizations and saying like, here are a few paths where we have to like get this right or the rest doesn't matter, was like a real gift to me as a philanthropist. So especially to the folks who are just new to the field, I wish this had existed, 6 years ago.
Speaking about gifts to the field, it's time to bring out Dan Grossman. Thank you, Genevieve.
Absolutely.
Hello, Dan.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon. Thanks for the kind words, Genevieve, as well.
So let's dive into the roadmap itself. You led this development process. Tell us about the journey.
Yes, so it's quite something. Certainly, as I came into the psychedelic field, I should share. I was as Jen, just mentioned. I had been with the healthcare practice Boston Consulting Group, where I worked with pharmaceutical and med tech companies on helping to develop and bring into the market healthcare innovations that didn't easily fit into existing healthcare systems, which is a great description of the situation psychedelics face. But of course, the psychedelic field turns out to be that way more diverse and way more complex in many ways, with many different paths to get innovations to people who can benefit than what I'd seen before. So our process, and I kind of recognize this very early, needed to be very consultative and very broad. So we consulted with more than 150 researchers, advocates, nonprofit operators, for-profit operators, and philanthropists, policymakers, others participating in the field, some explicitly in discussing roadmap and strategy, but many just in understanding, what are you doing and why are you doing it, and what might it lead to in 1 year, and what might it lead to in 5 years, and what might it lead to in 7 years, to really sort of understand the paths, not just through the field as it was today, but the paths into the future. And then our team's work turned to a systematic series of questions that has led to the set of recommendations in the roadmap. And that series of questions is, first, what is the future that we want circa the early 2030s? I should also acknowledge, by the way, I'm sure you have some listeners who are not United States based, but our work to this point the roadmap work has been largely focused on the US, even though PSFC's broader work does highlight opportunities for philanthropists around the world. So what's the future we want, circa early 2030s, or say 2030? And then where are we today? And this started in early 2024, so I think 2024 to 2030. And then we didn't just ask what is the gap from where we are to where we're going to be, but we said, given where we are now, what will happen if the philanthropic community doesn't actually do anything? What is that momentum case? Recognizing that, as Jen described, the business community is certainly starting to see investment opportunities here, so they're going to make some progress. And although what Jen also shared is true, that at the time PSFC was founded, there was hardly any money from the NIH or the NIMH or other federal agencies. It is just starting. And so we're optimistic that there is going to be more government funding. So we say, okay, so the business community is going to do a set of things. Government is, likely to at least increase funding for certain kinds of work. Now, where does that momentum case take us to in 2030 relative to our goal? And what's that gap out in 2030 between the world we would have if we do nothing versus the world we want? Then come back and say, okay, now here we are back in 2024, now 2025. What are the actions that should be taken now and in the next couple of years to close that gap at the end of the decade? And that forms the set of recommendations in the roadmap. We also ask the questions, what resources are needed to support those actions? And what milestones should we see along the way? If we want to keep the credibility of the philanthropic community and have them stay with us and stay engaged on this, they need to know it's not just putting resources in now and hoping something happens 7 years away, but rather being able to track and say, are we progressing? Is 2025 turning out the way we wanted? 2026 turning out the way we wanted? And do we need to adjust the plan as we go? Because of course we will, because it's a complex and dynamic and unpredictable field. I'll make one other point about this and that approach that we took of looking at the future we want, the momentum case, and the gap between those. It does keep us focused on opportunities for structural change in the field as a whole, which leaves out a lot of really, really important philanthropic opportunities that PSFC members and other philanthropists outside PSFC have been and should continue to fund, especially organizations that are providing services today, that are helping people with psychedelic care today, whether in the United States with ketamine, in the state regulated programs, and overseas. So there's important philanthropic work to help people in the here and now. It's important, and PSFC supports it, but it's not what the roadmap is about, which is more about the long-term structural change.
And is the roadmap meant to be a living document that evolves over time, or is it a snapshot in time?
It has to be a living document. Thank you for asking about that. We had a draft that supposedly private. It circulated a little bit in the fourth quarter of last year, our first testing ground to start to get some reactions and feedback. But already there have been some events in the field since then. And so the version that we have just publicly released, technically yesterday, and that Julie will provide to registrants for this call, but anyone can now find it on PSFC's website, already has some updates in certain areas where new developments have occurred and some organizations' plans have evolved. anything we do in this area, by the time the digital ink is dry, some aspects are going to be out of date. But I anticipate us releasing updates to the roadmap, researching continuously, and releasing updates at least twice per year. But that could be more. I doubt it would be less, but could be, depending on the pace of other change in the field, new initiatives emerging, existing initiatives needing to change direction for one reason or another.
So what was surprisingly easy and what was the most challenging part about creating this roadmap?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for that question. Surprisingly easy. I may not say it was easy, but surprisingly fulfilling was learning about all of the incredible dynamic activity out in the field. And then surprisingly easy was, getting people working in the field to be excited and eager to talk about it and eager to share. I think not just for the purpose of, potentially getting philanthropic funding somewhere down the road, although I'm sure that helped, but really just to be able to get into some more sort of cross-disciplinary conversation, and to be able to have discussions among small groups, and understand the roles that their respective initiatives play. So people were indeed very eager to speak with us in our field mapping effort. What was difficult really was prioritization. Two things really. One is prioritization among all of the good work being done. Which ones could we, in good conscience, recommend? Not just to individual philanthropists. I'll recommend initiatives to individual philanthropists all the time, as you know, but to recommend broadly to the philanthropic community, to say this is something we have to do together. So discerning those from among all the good work being done was challenging. And then, there's also the observation, to reference another point Jen made, we've got research being done in academic institutions, but by and large, much of what the roadmap talks about are startups. These are nonprofit startups where it's hard to tell exactly what is going to get them to that next level of maturity and stability, and to become self-sustaining in the way that we'd like them to be able to leave the enormous impact, to create the enormous impact that we hope for from them. That being said, over time, we did find some that we're very comfortable advocating for major bets on, and those are characterized in the roadmap. Some very heavily spotlighted, some at least mentioned. Everything mentioned in the roadmap, we think, does have really significant potential to move the field. But figuring out sort of which ones to really spotlight and which ones were likely to go the distance and still be delivering impact to the field in 3 years, in 5 years, in 7 years was difficult.
What kind of talent is needed in the field when we look at the executive directors of these organizations and the demand for high-level talent to come and lead these organizations?
There's so much that's needed. I mean, certainly connections and talent from the mainstream mental health field is increasingly important. We don't see nearly enough of that, nor enough partnership with the mental health community generally. Managerial talent for mid-sized organizations, and budgeting and long-term strategic planning and the like is needed. We did find this number of the organizations that we worked with and ended up piloting in the roadmap. It was our work pushed them quite heavily to develop plans that were longer term, to look out at not detailed budgets but rough budgets 3-5 years out that they had not thought about before. Whereas more established nonprofit would have some kind of a long-range plan. The others that I'm involved in outside the psychedelic space have that. I think a tremendous amount of input is needed in the general realm of sort of data and real world data, health economic data, and applications of AI to the analysis of that data, and to deepening our understanding of what really works and what doesn't. And that could be works clinically for people with real, with mental health diagnosis, or kind of works, I don't know what the right word is, works culturally in the way that we hope that like access to psychedelics will be positive for communities. And then again, health economically, to show that the value of these interventions that society will eventually pay for one way or another are a fantastic investment of healthcare or other dollars. The other kind of talent that I wouldn't want to miss, and probably can make a longer list, is in public policy, because there's so many opportunities at federal, state, and local levels to shift policies in ways that make research into psychedelics easier and make responsible and risk-reduced access to psychedelics really possible, for the first time in decades in most parts of the country. And so any individuals who have the experience at influencing policymakers or developing policy, that can achieve the right balance of the goals of access and safety are much needed in the field.
Well, we will post into the YPO's Psychedelics for Mental Health group some job opportunities for YPO
Yes.
members potentially that are desperately needed to find incredible talent for.
If I may, it's an excellent list. It's in psychedelicalpha.com. Last I checked, there were 25 listings on it, and some of them at executive director level of a few of the most influential organizations in the field. So I do hope many of your listeners will.
Yes, I heard
will check out that list and see things for themselves.
that there's a new opening at MAPS.
The executive director position of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies is open. That is now a 41-year-old organization. If you ask what is the one organization that has most trailblazed the psychedelic potential renaissance that we're in now, it is that organization, and the reach and the network and the ability to mobilize people, the depth of knowledge to educate people, the influence in the policy arena, the ability to get legions of volunteers to come for anything, or to get 12, 14,000 people to come to a conference in June that was referred to earlier. There's no other organization quite like that. So I would encourage anyone interested in the field, whether or not they wish to be the executive director of MAPS, to at least go check out and learn more about what they do.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. Now, everybody, it is time for the Q&A portion. So I'm going to bring everybody back because everybody's going to answer these questions. And if you have one that you'd like to ask, you're welcome to put it in at any time, and hopefully we can get to as many questions as possible. So in no particular order, how is PSFC approaching the new administration? RFK. Does this change your approach? People across the space are at an impasse, given that the support is positive, but not aligned with our politics. Who'd like to take that?
I have some things to say.
Okay.
So I think we're all at a little bit of an impasse, wondering there's still so many critical roles to be filled in the new administration that I think will give guidance on what we might expect to see from the field. But having a little bit of insight, and I'm not going to spill any beans here. Many of you on this call know several of the candidates who are being considered for top roles. So that gives me such tremendous hope. I also think that, when Bobby Kennedy was confirmed, the first EO to come out of the White House established the Maha Commission, and the first paragraph of that EO spoke to the mental health crisis in this country, and it stated that 1 in 5 American adults is suffering from a mental health condition. So they're stating that this is a priority area, and then they've stated again and again publicly that they're focused on root cause treatments and understanding the root cause of the chronic disease crisis that Americans are facing, whether it be mental health or physical health. And we know those things are so deeply connected. So to me, all signs point to being curious about understanding the root cause of addiction, which we know trauma is, a huge factor there, and what addresses trauma, these tools, and a whole bunch of others. So for all these reasons, I remain very hopeful. And I also feel like I'm in a holding pattern to see kind of where the chips will fall and where the opportunities are. But I can tell you, I've never been more hopeful. And I must say, I felt pretty sad that for all the work that we did with the Biden administration, that more didn't get done. So I think that there were actually people in the way of this work in that administration, and I'm hopeful that things are changing.
Thanks, Genevieve. Any other comments, Graham or Dan?
Well, I would also just bring to mind, there's a lot of different areas the federal government can do good things here. And I think we should all both be hopeful and also do the work to try to hold the new administration accountable for these things. And so, within FDA, I think that's some of what Genevieve is pointing towards, but it's also true at the Veterans Administration, getting access for for veterans within the VA to MDMA for PTSD, I mean, that's a treatment that works. And there's a lot of research that can be done right now, even before the FDA approval happens, that is incredibly important. We talked earlier about federal funding for research. That's so important. And so really calling for NIH and NIMH to increase funding for basic research and applied research in psychedelics, and the list goes on. So it's, you know, I do feel excited to see like what is possible with this administration, and I'm certainly want us all to be part of the work of being specific about what we want and asking for it.
All right. Dr. Catherine Lawson has a question. Does PSFC only fund trials? If so, is there a mechanism for supporting folks to develop trials? For example, if an org has a powerful and effective method for integration that has not gone the conventional route for research, is there a mechanism for helping them develop a research protocol? I think maybe the first question here is, does PSFC fund directly? And or is it a recommendation for funding? And if there is funding, is it just trials?
It's a great discussion. I mean, I'll start, but I'm going to be brief, and Dan or Genevieve may have more to say. For the most part, PSFC does not fund directly. Every now and then we have donors who ask us to allocate their funding and make decisions on their behalf, but 95% of the funding from PSFC members, it comes from the members giving directly to the nonprofit that they support. Our role is to create that community and to give information, resources, learning, that sort of thing. So to the more specific question, I'll leave that to Dan or Jen.
No, I think you answered it very well. I would also say that the PSFC community funds, I mean, the range of what they fund is as broad as the field itself. There are members of the community who are interests evolve over time, but very, very eager to support academic research, to support community-based research into into different practices with psychedelics and what kind of benefit they may deliver. There are also members who fund and support all kinds of other things. So I would say the base of what PSFC members support is very, very broad. In terms of the specific question about a mechanism from PSFC to support folks developing trials, I will be upfront that I don't know that we have something formal for that purpose, but we do seek to play a connecting role between initiatives that could make a big difference for the field and donors whose stated lane of interest within the field aligns with that. And we have as I said, there are a number of members who do who do seek to support or be involved in novel kinds of research. And so I think if we hear from someone, we don't sort of take open proposals or fund things, but if we hear from someone seeking to do something novel, then we would try to find members of our community who may be interested in that and make those connections whenever we can.
Thanks, Dan. Genevieve mentioned her excitement on state programs. How does PSFC support the state programs in Oregon and Colorado? Did PSFC initiate the ballot initiatives? Do you consider those a success so far? Why or why not?
I'll say a few things, and then Graham, to the technicalities. I think there's no better person than you to speak to the state programs. I am so giddy about these state programs. So we've seen more people come through Oregon in the last year and change, or 2 years, whatever it's been now, than have ever been through clinical trials in the past 2 decades. So the scale at which we're able to treat people in these programs is really outstanding, and we're learning a lot. A program I couldn't be, more proud of or happy to be a part of is a group therapy effort for veterans in Oregon. So a little over a year ago, for the first time, our U.S. veterans were served on U.S. soil. And I think that's just extraordinary. And when you think about the medical model, it's going to be for people with a diagnosis, and primarily it's probably going to be one-on-one or two-on-one kind of treatment. And most people on this call who have ever, experienced these medicines, you probably receive them in a group context. And that's what we know, have these medicines have been delivered for thousands of years. So these state programs allow you to kind of get closer to the ways that we know these medicines were served historically. And that makes me so hopeful. And yeah, so I guess would I consider them a success so far? Absolutely. And I can't wait to see Colorado come online. Have we seen mistakes along the way? Absolutely. Like, this is a brand new market that's being developed. So everything about it is new. And with that comes all kinds of challenges. But let me stop talking there and pass it to Graham.
I mean, it is exciting. This is really one of the most exciting things in the field. And it's so interesting how I think for the most part, the national media, the national, audience is not paying that much attention to it. Let me take just a second to say what it is, because I'm sure there's some people on the call who are like, wait, state regulated model, what are you even talking about? And so this is a state law, one in each, in Colorado, one in Oregon, that creates a system for the state to give licenses to people who grow mushrooms for the program, for laboratories to test the mushrooms for purity and potency, and then for clinics to be a place where clients can come and receive a guided psilocybin experience. They also license programs to train the guides who work in those places. So it's basically taking what exists throughout the country underground. There are underground practitioners in every part of the country right now, and it's bringing it above ground. And we believe it's really that's important because it just the ordinary person who's thinking that they might benefit. They're drinking too much alcohol and they heard psilocybin might help, or they're depressed and they've heard psilocybin might help. They're in hospice and they heard it might help. The average person is not going to go to some underground person who they don't really know what their credentials are. They're going to want they're going to want to have someone vouch for the quality. So that's what this is. And as Jen said, this is quite a new experiment. It's amazing how well it's working. Oregon started slow. I think in the first year, there were a few hundred people who actually received care because there weren't that many new businesses that had opened up. But as of today, after a little over 2 years, there are now 10,000 psilocybin experiences that have been administered. That's just astonishing. And I think that Colorado will probably grow at an even greater rate. So to me, this feels like the future. It also feels like a place where huge innovation can happen. I think that's part of the excitement you're hearing from Genevieve. It's like the medical system has a way of doing things. And if you want to bring psychedelics into the medical system, you mostly need to fit into that paradigm. The state regulated model is really a place where innovation can happen and care can, it kind of can take the whole tradition of what has happened for thousands of years, what the scientists are learning in the clinical trials right now, and what the latest learning is in the research that's being done right now, that all can be implemented in a way that is safe, licensed, and appropriate. So we're really excited about it. To the question of PSFC's role, we're a 501c3. That means that we as PSFC do not do political work, but there's a related organization called New Approach, which I'm also the director of that, and that's a 501c4, which did run both of those campaigns in Colorado and Oregon. Members of PSFC as individual philanthropists are also the main donors to those campaigns. So the money that was necessary to run those campaigns. So it's something that is to use the overused term adjacent, it is PSFC adjacent, but not specifically a PSFC effort. The implementation, though, in Oregon and Colorado, building out the clinics, training people, the training centers, all of that, that's very much right in the sweet spot of PSFC. And so it's part of the roadmap and certainly part of what our donors support, often through PSFC.
Yeah, if I may, not that I need to prolong this one, but I do have to call out that this effort to ensure that the state regulated programs are not just successful today, but sustainably successful is a top priority on our roadmap. And we highlight two very important organizations that are making that happen from the regulatory side and from the business side. And I would say one aspect of success that I think is under-recognized is, okay, so the Oregon programs get stood up, you learn some things that work well, some things that don't work so great. That learning transmitted directly into how the Colorado program is being set up. And at the same time, the Colorado program was getting into its late stages of design, learnings were going back to help evolve the Oregon program. And with all of the activity going on across many state legislatures around the country, we expect that learning to flow and infuse those other efforts. So that formation of sort of a learning system across the existing and potential state programs is a huge mark of success for the work of these roadmap organizations.
Thanks, guys. I know it's another question we have is how will PSFC use philanthropic dollars to ensure psychedelic research and access remain sustainable in the long run? So it seems like there's a little bit of confusion whether PSFC is a foundation giving out philanthropic dollars or it's individuals. But I think you've answered that question already, Graham, as to how that works. But maybe you can just say what the recommendation is to PSFC members regarding ensuring psychedelic research and access remain sustainable.
Well, Dan, that feels like a place to talk about the part of the roadmap that points to indigenous medicine conservation, which is part of that answer, right?
Well, certainly there's some of that. I wasn't sure if that was what it intended there. There's a great question further down the list about, well, does PSFC support organizations that work with indigenous communities to protect these traditions? Let me at least mention that, and then I'll come back on research a little bit. The answer, again, is absolutely yes. To very high. If you open the roadmap, it should be hard to miss the fact that preserving, indigenous biocultures is a top priority. It is difficult work, but it's the area of the field in which a little money goes an incredibly long way to protect communities and protect traditions from all kinds of threats. And I won't enumerate all the threats. I don't want to be a downer on that, but a couple of organizations, the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund and another called ICEERS, an international consortium. You'll see the rest of the acronym in the roadmap. Really do extraordinary work on that field, and we think that it's important. Certainly, it's incredibly important for ethical reasons to express recognition of all that, our practice with psychedelic, our awareness of molecules and our practice with them has been influenced by those indigenous traditions. But also we still have so much to learn about how to incorporate, psychedelic substances and those experiences into a culture. And it's not that we have the same culture they'd be imported into, but there's still much to learn from those communities, and to do so in the right way. And so the roadmap organizations named are our partners in making sure that we do that in the right way. So you'll see that. Coming back to ensuring that research and access remain sustainable in the long run. It's tricky. This is a social movement that's going to have ups and downs, as many other social movements have had. And there will be times in which there is more support from policymakers and times in which there's less. There'll be times in which there's more, philanthropic abundance, and times in which there's less. There will be times in which there's more investment capital and times in which there's less. But I think having this PSFC community, having gone from 8 people around a table to 200 people, that network of 200 is extremely diverse in the set of interests, in their reach, in the set of other contacts they have, in the expertise that they can bring to the table. And I think the more you have a network of interconnected individuals covering a lot of ground, the more resilience you have in that system. So I would hope we'll see less volatility in resources for the field in the years ahead than we did in the early years of PSFC.
We have time for, I think, like 2 more questions. And I see one that I think is an important one to ask that just came in. What is the shadow side of this work? What do you fear will go wrong? We talk about all the excitement and everything that's going right. And so I thought this might be an interesting one to bring in.
I hope that's, well, I'm sorry, I just called it myself. I've given some thought to this, and I don't have a sort of a tight list necessarily, but again, and maybe you're sick of hearing me say roadmap, but we had a number of advisors and advocates and PSFC members say, when you develop this roadmap, make sure you write about the risks, make sure you write about the unintended consequences in these complex systems where you do take one action over here and it could have these ripple effects. The one most notable is the continued development of what we call sort of the pollen effect, where more and more individuals are interested in accessing psychedelics. There's not enough channels to do so legally and safely today, and people might do things that are risky. So while, I don't expect the proportion of, there's some, psychedelics are, they're potent, they're serious medicines, there are better and worse ways to use them. And we do see some harms coming from broad population use of them, particularly in unregulated settings. And we don't expect the proportion of harm to go up as the population using psychedelics grows, but the absolute number may go up. And so that's why some of the work in the roadmap is how to keep the rate of harms down as the population using them grows. That's one area of risk. Another area of risk, of course, as referenced it, is to the indigenous biocultures that have, brought so much knowledge of psychedelics into our culture, where the more demand there is for their substances, for the kinds of experiences they can deliver, you're going to have more cultural tourism that can do quite a bit of harm, and you might have depletion of fragile species that are sources of medicines that could turn out to create significant harm for those cultures. So those two loom particularly large. The third, of course, is a cultural backlash. You try to do too much too fast in the wrong way, and you could have the 10 or 15 years of progress we've made with the medical community to start to become at least tentatively accepting of psychedelics go back the other way if we advance in an irresponsible way. So we don't want to lose that progress. Those are
Add a
my
little
three.
something to that. I
Please.
interpret the question just slightly differently. And I think about the fact that this is a new field, a new market, and all new markets can attract kind of charlatan types. And I think about, I worry about people who name themselves shamans and the kinds of harms that they can cause. And I think, how do we confront that? And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so big on group therapy, because it's kind of the power gets dispersed amongst the group, and you don't have one leader of this group holding all of this power. So yeah, that's what I would say is the shadow side to this work. And I think there can also be like these feelings of grandiosity that these compounds can create for people, or spiritual bypassing. Those are the types of things that come to mind when I see that question. I love it. This autonomous attendee has some great questions. Well, that's our dear friend Josh. Looking at you, Josh.
I don't know if it's an autonomous attendee, but it is certainly an anonymous attendee.
It might also be autonomous. Yeah, we don't
know. We are at the hour. I want to just leave us with one question. And then, George, I know that you have a question here. If one of you might want to type in an answer for him, we can do that at the same time. But I thought this question, which is, what will success for PSFC look like at the end of 2025, end of 2030, and what will show you have achieved your mission?
Oh, this is a big one. This is not an easy closing question, but the mission of PSFC is to make sure that psychedelic healing is available to all who can benefit. We have developed, as I said, milestones for 2025, 2027, and 2030 that you'll be able to read about. I would say, the highlights for the long term for 2030 are really that there's, adequate evidence has been accumulated and recognized very broadly, including by today's skeptics, that justified multiple access channels being opened with both FDA approvals and more state-regulated programs operating sustainably. That psychedelic care itself is recognized as an evidence-based therapy in mainstream clinical practice guidelines, leading to, of course, many thousands of veterans being treated, leading to many community-based organizations adopting them, leading to multiple state Medicaid programs covering psychedelic therapy, usually the last to get coverage, but if they're there early, then that's a good sign. That we have some not just destigmatization, like, okay, psychedelics are great, but really informed destigmatization, where most adults in the United States know the benefits and risks and the contraindications and some safe use practices of psychedelics, whether they practice themselves or not. And that and that we have ethical norms deeply embedded into practitioner training, into service operations, into research conduct, and at the same time that ethics is extending to the indigenous communities from who we've learned. That's our 2030. I'm not going to take the time to give you 2025, but one can read about it, and you can always call me and ask more about it.
I mean, I will state a much narrower subset of success, which is that I would really like to see a handful, maybe even a good number of the folks on this call join PSFC. And a way to do that would be to email me graham@psfc.co. You can find me on our website. We really do want to grow the community. It's an amazing group of people. And one way, I think Genevieve mentioned this, one way to get to know us and find out whether this is the right place for you is to come to our donor day on June 17th in Denver, which is the day before the MAPS official conference starts. It's going to be a lot of fun. You'll learn a lot and you'll meet some good people.
Genevieve, what's your final say on what does success look like?
Oh, in the very short term, I would love to see some government funding unlocked. I would love to see some of these compounds come off of Schedule 1. And I would love to see 1 or 2 get through FDA. And then in the long run, it's safe, legal, affordable access for people.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And if you're watching this as a live stream, thanks for watching this as well. We are with PSFC, the Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative, with Dan Grossman, Genevieve Jurvetson, and Graham Boyd. And we look forward to seeing you at the rest of our calendar of events. We have a cadence of once per month, and that will be posted in the YPO Connect group, and you can join us each month. And thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Julie.